So this song is a great introduction to our last carrot. So far we've talked about fame, money and stuff, perfection. Last week was a little intense. We talked about the disease to please, chasing after approval, right? And in fact, we've been discovering that as you continue to chase after that, you actually move into idolatry. Today's carrot is promoted all over the place. It's everywhere. In fact, do you know that you can pay $197 to start a course, and they'll teach you how to live your best life? And there's also these other websites that will, you send them a picture, and they'll put a background on you, and then they'll put up they'll create a thing that makes it look like you took a vacation. So I'm going to show you some pictures of some vacations I've never took. Okay? So here's the first one. I've never been to Paris. Okay, here's the next one. Niagara Falls. I have been to Niagara Falls, by the way. We used to, when I was little, we grew up 14 miles from there. So I went there all the time. How about this one? The Pyramids of Giza. Gosh, it was hot there. It was so hot, which is why I'm wearing a sweatshirt. And then the last one, of course, this other one that I never went to was the moon. Okay, so here's this thing. This last carrot is another one of those that's at the core of our lives. This is the core thing. We chase after it, and on the outside it seems reasonable. And it's a carrot called comfort. Comfort. So John, in one of his letters, he wrote this. Listen to what he says. 1 John chapter 2, verse 15. Do not love this world, nor the things it offers you, for when you love the world, you do not have the love of the Father in you. For the world offers only a craving for physical pleasure, a craving for everything we see, pride in our achievements and possessions. These are not from the Father, but are from this world. And this world is fading away along with everything that people crave, but anyone who does what pleases God will live forever. Okay, so in that whole letter of 1 John, he uses those two words, this world, 17 times. And to fully understand what he means, we need to understand what he does not mean when he uses the word the world. Okay? He does not mean we shouldn't love people in the world. If that's the case, we're in trouble. Okay? Even our enemies, Jesus said, oh yeah, by the way, not only are you supposed to love people in the world, but you're also supposed to love your enemies. Okay, that's not what he means. He also does not mean that we shouldn't enjoy the gifts that God gives us, right? Every good thing comes from the Father of lights, okay? He doesn't mean that. Or he also does not mean that we shouldn't love God's creation. The book of Romans is very clear that God's creation all actually displays who he is. That's not what he means. What is it? What is this thing when he says the world? Okay? It's this Greek phrase that actually means cultural world system. Or you might say the spirit of this world. Okay, so what is the cultural world system that we live in today? And it's this: you don't need God in your life. That's the cultural world system. You don't need God. There's no reason for you to need God in your life. But let's be honest, okay? Let's be honest. Everyone here wants a life that's defined more by ease and comfort than struggle, don't we? Right? That's the truth about who we are. But here's the problem with that. If we continue to chase that carrot of comfort, we're going to drift towards lazy inactivity. And we see it. Like this neighborhood here is a picture of what can happen when we have our focus if we're supposed to be chasing comfort, whether you have it or not, that's what happens. Okay, so a while ago, a number of years ago, there was this movie that came out about this little robot that was left on Earth. It was kind of an apocalyptic movie. And so all that was left on Earth was garbage. And so this robot's job was to grab the garbage, compact it together into a square, and start stacking it. That was its purpose for this robot, right? The name of the movie is WALL-E. And so what happens is eventually WALL-E ends up on the spacecraft that all the human beings left on to escape Earth because nothing green was growing ever at all. So they went on this spaceship, right, to get away from Earth. And so they found the secret of living life in complete comfort. Okay, so I'm going to show you a picture of what that was happening on this spacecraft, okay? So look at this, okay? So what was happening was, by this point, everything took place in the chair. You didn't have to ever get out of the chair. It would have this thing that would come out and brush your teeth and comb your hair, and you would go and you'd stay in the chair and take a shower and all of that stuff. And you didn't even have to chew anymore because everything came in a cup. Everything. Steak, pizza, cake, everything came in a cup, right? And you could actually watch on the screen there too, like if you wanted to learn about golf, you could watch people sitting in their chair playing golf, right? So you didn't have to ever, you couldn't walk. They didn't even know how to walk anymore, right? So that was the case, right? Well, by the end of the movie, they end back at Earth. And in the closing credits of the movie, it shows them coming out of the ship. And they were actually starting to struggle, starting to grow food, reclaiming the earth, working hard. And it actually made them stronger and healthier. Okay? So here's the thing. Unfortunately, this comfort that we actually chase after a lot of times is counterfeit. It's counterfeit. Because God wants us to experience authentic comfort, not counterfeit comfort. So how do you know if you're chasing counterfeit comfort? How do you know that? Well, I think there's a couple things that take place in us. The first thing is that it starts to reveal my own spiritual emptiness. Like when you're chasing counterfeit comfort, it actually starts to bring to the surface this spiritual emptiness. Okay, we read in 1 John 2, in verse 15, I'm going to read it again. It says, "Do not love this world, nor the things it offers you. For when you love the world, you do not have the love of the Father in you." It's basically what John is saying. Like, if you're chasing after counterfeit comfort, if you're chasing after that, what's going to happen is how you think about lost people, how you think about the poor, how you think about being faithful, how you think about making sacrifices for others is going to start to wane. That's what's going to happen as you're chasing after that. I've had conversations with people that I've known that they used to be on fire for Jesus. Like they were even on staff at church before, right? They're on fire for Jesus. That's how they would talk, and then I would meet them. So like 8 years goes by, 9 years, 10 years goes by, and then I meet with them for lunch. And I start talking to them, and it seems like all that they can talk about is making sure their kids are wearing the right clothes, making sure they're hanging around the right kind of people, that they're driving the right kind of car, they're living in the right kind of house. No more talk about living a Christ-centered life. Like, it's all about living their best life. That's what it's about. And being a Christ follower means we aren't all about chasing that carrot of living our best life. Comfort. Paul, when he was writing to some Christians in Corinth, listen to what he wrote. Because he wanted them to understand, you need to understand what drives me as a Christ follower. He said, in chapter 5, verses 14 and 15. For Christ's love compels us. We are compelled. And he died for all, that those who live should no longer live for themselves, but for him who died for them and was raised again. That's our mindset. As a Christ follower, that's our mindset. Okay? So the first thing that can happen to help you know that if you're chasing after counterfeit is that you start to see your spiritual emptiness. The second thing that happens is that it starts to eliminate your need for faith. It eliminates your need for faith. Why would you need faith? If you just have everything provided for you. Right? In the book of Hebrews, I don't know if you've ever read the book of Hebrews, chapter 11, it's called the Hall of Faith, and it lists all these people. All these people throughout history. By faith, Abel brought his offering to God. He was eventually murdered because of that. Enoch was taken by God. Noah was convinced that there was going to be a flood, even though it had never rained. Right? Abraham left his home not knowing where he was going, right, to occupy the promised land. Sarah believed she was going to have a baby in her old age. Joseph, on his deathbed, spoke of the exodus of Israel from the Egyptian army. Moses, with a speech impediment, right, was used by God to face down Pharaoh. Rahab, a prostitute, believed God would save her family. None of these were easy things. None of those people lived in comfort. Every one of them required faith so that God would show up and do the impossible. Every one of them. In fact, in chapter 11, 16 times he mentions people and their life. Guess what their life is defined by? Every person, their life is defined by faith. Not comfort, faith. Right? In fact, the writer of Hebrews says it's impossible to please God without faith. You can't do it. Right? So I have a core question for you. Ready? It's going to get personal now. Here we go. Ask yourself this question. What part of my life am I helpless without God intervening? What part of my life am I helpless without God intervening? I had to chew on that. What part of my life am I helpless without God intervening? Because you cannot chase after this counterfeit comfort and walk by faith. You can't do it. Okay? So why would we chase that? Why would we chase after that counterfeit faith? Why would we chase after that when God wants us to experience authentic comfort? Because it's not that God doesn't want us to be comforted. That's not the issue. He does. He does. But if you're going to experience authentic comfort, there has to be a realignment on how we live our lives. And we have to change how we live our lives. Okay? You need to know the source. Okay? 2 Corinthians chapter 5, starting in verse 3. Listen to what Paul writes. All praise to God, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. God is our merciful Father and the source of all comfort. He comforts us in our troubles so that we can comfort others. I thought this life was all about me. When they are troubled, we will be able to give them the same comfort God has given us. Nothing is wasted with God. For the more we suffer for Christ, the more God will shower us with his comfort through Christ. Okay, so here's the thing. If you're really serious about living your life by faith, if you're really serious about doing that, living a sent life that we talk about, you're going to base your life on God, how God's Word defines it. Okay, I have some challenges for you. These are challenges for me. Here's the first challenge. Embrace divine faith-testing discomfort. Embrace divine faith-tested discomfort. Jesus' brother James, he wrote this letter. Listen to what he says about this whole idea of these things that come up in our lives. I love how the Message puts this. Listen to this. Consider it a sheer gift, friends, when tests and challenges come at you from all sides. You know that under pressure, your faith life is forced into the open and shows its true colors. So don't try to get out of anything prematurely. Let it do its work so you can become mature and well-developed, not efficient in any way. That word testing is dakameion, and it's this. They use this when in jewelry making, and it's when a silversmith takes a bunch of silver and he heats it up. He puts it under this heat. He heats it up, and what's called dross floats to the top, and he takes a scoop and he scoops off the dross, and then he puts it under the heat again, and the dross goes to the top, and he scoops it off. And he keeps doing that over and over again until he can look into the pot and he can see his reflection in the silver. Okay? God is doing the same thing through you and me when we experience suffering. He wants to use it so that he can see his reflection in your life. I want you to stop and think about something, okay? When you have grown the most in your relationship with God, was it during really great times in your life? No. I can guarantee you in my life it has not been. I can guarantee that. If you've ever decided that, you know what, I think I'm going to get healthy. I think I need to get healthy, okay? How much fun was it for you to change your eating habits and start exercising? Was that fun? Was there some discomfort in that? Is there still some discomfort in that? Right? Yes. Right? As I'm getting older, I'm finding out that the obstacle, we've seen this happen at TNC numerous times, this obstacle is an opportunity for God to show off. It's an opportunity for him to show up. The setback that you experience is going to be an opportunity for a divine appointment. It's a divine setup between you and God, right? A misery that you go through can actually become a ministry. God can actually use it in your life to become a ministry. Because I guarantee you, you're not the only one who is going through what you're going through. Your pain is going to produce a depth of character. In fact, the Apostle Paul, okay, listen to this, Apostle Paul. We were just talking about this in men's Bible study yesterday morning. The Apostle Paul wrote about this whole thing as far as changing your mindset, not chasing comfort. No. You're seeking comfort from God in the midst of living life. Okay, listen to what he wrote. 2 Corinthians chapter 9, or chapter 1, verse 9. Let's go to that next one up there. All right, listen to this. Oh, you ready? He's getting there. Hello. There it is. Thank you. All right, so he's writing them. He wants them to understand this is what we've gone through. He says, in fact, we expected, through all of this, what Paul is going through, he said, No, I think we need to go. Can you go back one? Can we go back one? Go back one. There you go. All right, here we go. We think you ought to know, dear brothers and sisters, about the trouble we went through in the province of Asia. We were crushed and overwhelmed beyond our ability to endure, and we thought we would never live through it. Anybody here? Anybody here been in situations like you're like, oh, well, I'm crushed? I don't know. This is Paul talking. Okay? And then in verse 9, he increases that. All right? Let's go to the next one. He says, in fact, we expected to die. And then he goes, oh, by the way, this is what I discovered what God was doing in my life in the midst of that. He said, as a result, we stopped relying on ourselves and learned to rely only on God, who raises the dead. We actually learned how to do that. So the first challenge is embrace faith-tested discomfort. Okay? Second challenge is this. Embrace the fact this is not your best life. This is not your best life. I don't care how many carrots you chase. This is not your best life. Paul wrote to some Christians in Rome. He said in Romans chapter 8, verse 18, yet what we suffer now is nothing compared to the glory he will reveal to us later. Jesus, when he was here, he gave us some amazing words. In John chapter 14, verses 1 through 3, he said, by the way, he said this right after Peter said, I'm never gonna deny you, Jesus. I'm never gonna do that. And then Jesus goes, oh yeah, by the way, you're gonna deny me 3 times before the night's over. And then Jesus says this, don't let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God, trust also in me. There is more than enough room in my Father's house. If this were not so, would I have told you that I'm going to prepare a place for you? When everything is ready, I will come and get you so that you will always be with me where I am. This is not our home. This is not our home. We're visiting. Someday we will experience our best life, but it's not here. It's not. So here's the one thing. I'm going to give you the one thing now. Everybody's got to turn their thing over. Here's the one thing. Trying to fulfill an eternal longing with temporary comfort will lead to an empty life. It always will. Always. Jesus said, if you're going to try to hang on to your life, you're actually going to lose it. If you keep chasing that carrot called comfort, you're going to find out that it's going to lead to emptiness because you're never going to find it. So I'm going to show you a picture of somebody. Some of you know who he is, some of you do not. All right? Okay, this guy up here, his name is Brian. Let me tell you about Brian. Brian was a guy, when we first started TNC, we would do help out. He started hanging around us even before we started TNC. And we were ministering down there. We were helping out with the summer block party. And so Brian would show up, almost always intoxicated. Tall, lanky guy, always wore a bandana. And he would talk like this. That was Brian. And he would always call me cowboy. right? And so Brian started coming and hanging out with us, right? And so, we'd be doing things or whatever. And then Brian, and then we would be outside, like trying to fix stuff or whatever. And Brian would come up and go, hey, cowboy, can I help you do some of that stuff? I was like, yeah, sure, come on. So he started helping us with different things. And so at one point, I don't remember when, but at one point we walked into the church here. And he goes, hey, I just want you to know, I used to come here to this church. Like, my parents came here when I was a kid. I was like, really? He goes, yeah. And so, Brian, he's in the neighborhood. At that point, I didn't even know where Brian lived at that point. And so, fast forward, we were having Bible study, and all of a sudden, Brian shows up. Mostly sober, which was normal for Brian. And so he shows up, and he starts coming to Bible study, right? And we would have some conversations about things. And then on a Saturday night, Brian shows up to service. And then he starts to be pretty consistent at coming to Bible study, or church on Saturdays, right? And you never knew what Brian was going to do during a service. Like, there was one time I was up here preaching, and he was sitting right there, and he had this long coat on, and so he decides to get up, come up while I'm preaching. And I'm like, oh, Brian, what are you going to do? Please let there be clothes under that, please. So he comes up, stands right behind me, and he puts his hand in his pocket. And I'm like, oh, okay. And he pulls out a sucker. And he goes, brother, I just want you to know I love you. And he gave me a sucker, and he went back and he went and sat down, right? That was kind of what happened. Well, at one point during a service, Brian brought one of his friends, okay? And which was great. Brian was always bringing some people with him to church. Like, gosh, he's just something else. So anyway, so he came with a friend to church. I wasn't preaching at that time, but Brian thought it would be a really good idea to start a fist fight with his friend in the middle of church. So fortunately, I was sitting by him, and I was like, whoa, Brian. Let's go and take a walk. So Brian and I went out, and we took a walk down the neighborhood. And I didn't know where we were walking. I was just kind of following Brian, and we were talking about stuff, and he was telling me about things, and he starts to tell me about his life. And I started to learn some things about Brian. Brian used to have a lot of money. Brian had horses. Brian had a ranch, and some things had taken, and he started chasing these things, these carrots that we were talking about. In Brian's life, it created chaos, and it destroyed everything, destroyed it all. He had nothing left. So Brian, he took me, and all of a sudden we're standing in front of his house. And I'm like, oh, this is weird. So we walk up to Brian's house, and he goes, hey, cowboy, come on in for a second. So he invites me into his house. And so in our neighborhood here, when people invite you into their house, it's a big deal because they're inviting you into their mess. Yeah. So we walk into Brian's house, or I walk into Brian's house, and there was, I couldn't tell what was the living room, what was the bedroom. You just couldn't tell. But anyway, we end up, there's a bed in there, and Brian sits down, and I sit down on some boxes, or I don't even know what I sat on, but anyway. And so, Brian's talking to me, and da-da-da-da-da, and then all of a sudden he stops. And there's this moment of sobriety that comes over Brian. He looks at me and he goes, Pastor Pat, I just want to be a good man. Can Jesus help me be a good man? Because I haven't been a good man. And I said, oh, Brian, I said, Jesus is already starting to help you become a good man. And we talked for a little bit longer, and he went and he grabbed something, and it was this little church this little ceramic church, and he goes, I just want you to know that I want you to have this church. And I'm like, where did you steal that from, Brian? You know? So anyway, so he gives me this little church, right? And we talk, and probably 6 months later, and I remember baptizing Brian. That was a big thing for baptizing Brian. And so 6 months after I had that encounter, whatever, I hadn't seen Brian for a while. And tried to find out about where he was. He had gotten sick. Brian was an alcoholic. And he had gotten sick, so he had to go into the hospital. And when you're a raging alcoholic and you go into the hospital, you detox. Like this detox thing happens really fast. And so Brian was in there for a while, and then he got out, and then I hadn't heard from him for a while. And what happened was his dad walked into his house and found Brian dead on the floor. And we had a funeral for Brian. I wish you could have been here at that funeral. Because there were people here from the neighborhood that just talked about, he wasn't a perfect guy. Please don't, he wasn't. He was a broken man, but I tell you what, there was this one lady that stood up, and she came into the mic, and she started talking about Brian. She goes, I know Brian, he had his demons, and he did, but I just want you to know that Brian was a good man. He was a good man. Brian had chased the carrots, and he came up empty. And I'll tell you what, when he gave his life to Jesus, and I wish you could have been here when Brian worshiped, because he had these huge long hands. It touched either pane. You know, this big hands that he would put out here when he was worshiping God. And he just loved to be in here, church. And as we're finishing this whole thing about carrots and what you're chasing after, the bottom line is, how are you going to realign your life? What are you going to chase after? Are you going to chase after things that last? That's our question this morning, right? What are you going to chase after? So we're going to sing this last song. Just do some business with God during this. What's the comfort stuff that you're chasing after? What's the authentic comfort that you need to embrace? So let's stand. Let's sing this last song.